Hey guys, welcome back to a new video. If you're new, my name is Mark and I'm a professional VFX artist and film director. I work with quite a few high-end companies like Netflix, HBO Max, Warner Brothers, Honda and FIFA and many more. Antigravity was kind enough to send me one of their A1 360 drones, and it's actually insane how useful this is going to be on future projects. Basically, this drone has a 360 camera, which makes it really useful for creating Gaussian Splattings. So to really test the capabilities of this drone, we've come to Wales to capture some of the beautiful scenery. Before I show you how I made the shot you saw in the beginning, I thought it would be good to share some of my experience when flying this drone for specifically creating Gaussian Splattings. I'll have a time code on the screen in case you want to skip this part. So I did quite a lot of tests and extensive flying with the drone to really try and understand how it works and what you need to look out for. So I thought I would summarize some of the things that are most important when capturing a Gaussian splat, especially when capturing a large environment. There is a great reconstructing company called Splatting, which I believe they might be partners with Antigravity. On their website, they have a lot of great information and guides on how to use this specific drone and the Insta360 for capturing Gaussian Splattings. Regardless of this summary, I would still recommend going through their website and reading through the necessary information. Okay, so first of all, I would really recommend setting your flight mode to cinematic because that ensures that your movement is going to be smooth throughout the whole flight. Firstly, I would say plan out what the flight path is and what you're going to capture, and then go back to the start point and press record. Once you press record, film the entire path and do not stop recording until you go back to the starting point. So you basically create like a loop. You should not stop during the filming. Always continue to fly and smoothly turn around to get the different passes. Try to fly with a continuous speed, but I would probably say you don't have to be too slow because your shutter speed is quite high. Depending on how large of a scene you're capturing, you can go quite close to the ground to capture a lot of the details. You definitely need to use manual camera settings and use as high of a resolution as you can. In our case, it's going to be 8K. You want as little motion blur as possible, so you want to set your shutter speed as high as possible. In most cases, I think it works if you do it between 1000 and 2000 per second. I think on the website they say on a cloudy day you should probably do 1000 per second, and on a sunnier day you can do 2000 per second. Also, it's important to set the bitrate to high because that ensures there are less compression. So if you're planning to relight your scene in 3D later on, then you want to make sure that you film on a cloudy day. It was actually cloudy earlier today when I filmed with the drone. That's kind of the best lighting scenario for capturing Gaussian splats that you want to relight, because you want the light to be as diffused as possible and you don't want any harsh shadows. If the lighting scenario changes while you're filming, you need to stop recording and go back to the start position and wait until the weather becomes how you want it to be. So if the sun peaks out, then you just want to make sure that it becomes cloudy again before you start filming. One of the biggest things that I found about the weather conditions is that you want to make sure that there is very little wind. It's beneficial for both the drone and the environment you're capturing, as if there's wind, then for example like the grass is moving in each frame, so the Gaussian splitting is not going to be very accurate. So definitely try to film on a day when there is less wind, or try to find areas where there's some coverage. Who's this baby? You're so cute! Alright, just before I continue this video, I wanted to share my thoughts on flying this drone. This is probably my favorite drone I've flown so far, and the reason for that is that it's so easy to fly it. I wasn't a huge fan of using the joystick before, but this motion controller is so much more fun and easier to fly, at least for me. The menu system is really easy to navigate in. You basically use the motion controller as you would use a VR controller to go through the different settings. I also love that you can use the flight simulator before you fly outside. And regarding Gaussian splatting, I only really did one type of Gaussian splat, which was the large scale landscape, as I thought this drone would be perfect for that, and I feel like the end results came out pretty good. I haven't tried capturing an individual element like a tree or a car, so I am very keen to try that in the future. I think there are so much potential in using Gaussian splatting for your projects. For example, using it for 3D scenes and relighting them in your 3D software. This is probably the best use case for me, and I'm already thinking about implementing this for my next film. But you can also use it in pre-production. For example, you could go location scouting and bring this drone or basically any camera or even your phone and scan in the location you're going to be filming at, and then you can bring it back, create the Gaussian splatting and try different framings and even different lighting setups, which I feel like is much better than just using pictures. It's a little bit complicated to figure out at first, but once you figure it out, it's actually quite easy to use. There are some parts like optimizing, which was a little bit harder because I never really used Python that much, but I'll leave links in the description for everything I've used in this video so you could try it yourself. All right, back to the video. So I am using MipMap to reconstruct these environments. After doing some research, this seemed like a good option for me as I can run it locally, so it's using my computer's hardware to reconstruct. However, there are quite a few companies including Splatica where you can upload the raw file and it would reconstruct it on their servers, so you don't have to have a strong computer. Anyway, in MipMap, all you have to do is create a new project. You can use images, videos, and what's great is that you can import the raw footage from the A1 drone, which is the .insv file. You can decide how many frames it's going to use to train it. I usually go with about 300 images. For the large environments I made that you saw in the intro, I ended up with over 20 million splats, which I had to optimize as my computer could not handle it, but I'll touch on this in a bit. The drone has 2 cameras, so I aim for about 600 images in total. Then I'm actually going to remove the top camera because I found that for the specific Gaussian splats I made, the top camera introduced more floating splats, although there were some cases where it added more detail, so it's just a matter of experimenting. Then I click on the camera option and choose the Antigravity A1 8K template from the database. Switch the quality to ultra high, turn on Gaussian Splatting, and also I like to include an FBX file, which means it gives you a 3D model as well, which you could use for all sorts of things like dynamics, quicker previewing, etc. Lastly, I click on more settings and turn on remove floating object, then press start reconstruction. Once the reconstruction is done, you can preview the Gaussian splat and the 3D model. Then moving on to optimizing. This is very simple to use apart from installing it. You can set how much you want to reduce it, so 0.3 means it's going to keep 30% of the splats, so we'll end up with about 7 million splats. There is a very cool website called Splat, and it's great for previewing even large Gaussian splats. The original has 24 million splats and my computer ran out of memory when trying to render it from Cinema 4D, so I was forced to use the optimized version, but even that looks pretty good in my opinion. I use Cinema 4D to create the 3D scenes. They are actually incredibly simple as the Gaussian Splat is doing most of the heavy lifting, but I can think of so many ways I can utilize Gaussian Splats in the future for much more complex 3D shots. To import the Gaussian Splat into Cinema 4D, I am using a plugin by Alpha Pixel, link in the description. Before doing anything, to be able to move in the viewport a bit more freely, I like to enable the point cloud previewing. I sometimes set the splat density to even lower than the default 40%, something like 15%. To be able to render it, you need to enable rendering. To be able to relight it, you need to set the relight blend to 1. This basically means that 100% of the splat will be relit. So let's say if you set this to 0.5, then 50% of the original lighting you captured it with will remain. Think of it as a default light basically. I usually set this to 1 though to relight everything. You might see some areas missing or the splat looking transparent. To fix this, you need to set the render splat size higher. So in my case, I increased it to 1.25. Thank you to AJ from Alpha Pixel for helping me with this. Once this is set, for this particular shot, I imported a HDRI to make the lighting look more like the beginning of Blue Hour. Once I was happy with how the environment looked, I actually turned it off to then set up the helicopter 3D model and the animations. Otherwise, there is a constant load every time you move in your viewport, and that's how simple this shot is, and in my opinion, it looks pretty good. Let's move on to the UFO shot. The Gaussian splat for this shot was set up the exact same way. I added a HDR light to get a base lighting. It's meant to be nighttime, so I've set it very low. In my case, that's 0.05. Then I added a basic cylinder and animated it to grow downwards. I then added an area light and made this cylinder to be the emitter of that light. So this is how I made the beam of light coming from the UFO spaceship. Of course, to make the beam visible, I added some environmental fog. I added a noise node to make the fog look more realistic. Then I added a cow 3D model and it came with this moving animation. So all I did was to animate it fly upwards when the beam hits the ground. As you can see, the edges of the Gaussian splat is visible and it looks pretty bad. To fix this, I added a couple of basic landscape objects and added a very basic ground material to them. Then populated them with a lot of trees to create a forest. So this hides the end of the Gaussian splat, but it also makes sense for the scene as a forest in the background would be realistic. I wanted to add a bit more light to the forest, so I duplicated the HDR map and increased the intensity value to 0.5 and made sure they only affect the forest. For this shot, I also separately made a very simple particle simulation with some small grass elements floating around and flying upwards with the beam. Moving on to compositing, both shots had very simple comping, just adding small details really. For the helicopter shot, I wanted to add some more detail to the glass, so I used Element 3D to quickly do this. I brought in the 3D model from Cinema 4D alongside the camera and the null, which had the animation from the helicopter. I then linked up everything in the comp, then added some grunge to the glass material in Element 3D. Lastly, I set the Element 3D layer to the soft light blending mode. Then I did a simple color correction and grade pass in After Effects, and this shot was done. For the UFO shot, this is the raw render from Cinema 4D. I tried to find the middle ground in terms of quality and render time, as each frame for this shot took 40 minutes to render, and even then there is quite a bit of noise. I denoised the footage as much as I could. Then I added the render of the leaps flying around, some floating upwards. To add more detail to the light beam, I created a fractal noise and scaled it down on its width and scaled it up on its height, then animated to go upwards. Then I set it to the lighten blending mode. I also added some displacement with the heat distortion plugin by Video Copilot. I did some very subtle color correction with Lumetri, and then added some grain with Film Convert to sort of globalize the noise, as there were still some noise left in the middle. And here are the final shots once more. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video useful. I can think of so many use cases for Gaussian Splats in the future. It's very exciting to have access to such technology with a relatively easy workflow. Thank you once again to Antigravity for sending me this drone, and I'm very much looking forward to using this in future projects. Beyond regular aerial filming, there are so many creative ways to use it and explore its features. If you're a videographer, filmmaker, content creator, or visual effects artist, it's definitely worth trying out.